Welcome. We are the Mental Barbell, your go-to resource for everything mental performance. We're here to talk about sports, psychology, sports psychology, and everything in between. Welcome to the ultimate mental performance journey. Welcome to the Mental Barbell. My name is Ian Reardon, and I'm joined today by our excellent newest coach, Mr. Michael Mancini. Mike, how are you today?
Great, Ian. Couple days before Thanksgiving. It's going to be a fun week. How are you doing?
Absolutely. No, I'm doing very well as well. Just coming off a big wedding that I had with a lot of old friends from some college teams that I was a part of. So very cool to
Fantastic.
reconnect with some old buddies and see where everyone's gone. After graduating and see all the great things that they've been up to. But I'm always very appreciative to rekindle old friendships and talk to some very close friends that I once had that we maybe drifted apart a little bit, but that's all part of the process of growing up. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good for you. I'm glad you're able to do that. That's cool.
absolutely, yeah, and that we'll talk a little bit more about the Thanksgiving holiday coming up and how athletes can utilize the emotion of gratitude or the feelings of gratitude to enhance their performance. And there's some tremendous benefits of that emotion and expressing gratitude for your team and yourself and just creating really long-lasting friendships. So we'll get into that a little bit, but I wanted to take a moment to recognize some sports psychology that made its way into some professional sports news this week. So I think it's great to talk about the NFL. We're pushing week 13 here, going into the Thanksgiving holiday. Um, do you watch any Thanksgiving football with your family on the holidays?
Oh, yeah, that's pretty much a tradition. Even if it's not a team that we follow or whatnot, it's just like part of the day. It's really what it is. So it's kind of cool. How about you?
Yeah, same thing. Absolutely. Yeah, just the Cowboys have always been a tradition to watch. So, watch the Thanksgiving parade, and then you throw the Cowboys game on. So,
Right.
I think it's awesome that it's really become a cultural moment. And this entangling of national holidays, but also national pastimes. And like you said, even if you're not rooting for your hometown team, you're still rooting for football as a whole. And I think that's very cool as a country that we kind of recognize that's it's an integral part of the Thanksgiving season. So I think it just is a testament to how important sports are in our modern culture and creating a strong sense of community, whether it be your team or football fans at large. But it's a good reminder for us that sports hold a very important place in the hearts of Americans and people all around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that a couple you mentioned around the world. I Italian background. I have some family back there, and I remember when I was a kid and we went back. My parents' hometown was a small town on the eastern seaboard, and they had a couple different levels of locals, what we would call soccer, but they call football teams that they were just excruciatingly passionate about. And for us, it would be maybe the equivalent of like a neighborhood soccer team or a softball team or something like that, but they really rallied around their local and regional teams when they played on a Sunday afternoon or whatever the case may be. And was just kind of fun to see that. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to visit London for the first time in my life, and you'd walk by pubs and you'd say, wow, there's a ton of people in there. And then as you walk in, you'd realize they were congregated around the big screen TV because it was, I don't know who, Manchester's against Liverpool or something like that. But that was a cultural moment, as you just alluded to. So it is something that true for Thanksgiving, the football is true, and the New Year's Day college games and all that kind of stuff. But it is truly international, and it's a cultural um, idea and part of that bringing together folks from all over the place and all over the world with different cultures and whatnot around the singular object, and it happens to be sports.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's also an aspect, when you're younger, you look up to these players, right? You look up to them as role models and you learn, their they're encountered with a serious amount of adversity, right? They're in a football game, they got a whole team trying to prevent them from their goals. And so, as a kid, you watch that and you see things. I know we discussed before the podcast a little bit the Elijah Clark forced fumble from the Cowboys this past weekend. I'm sure everybody's seen that video, but kids watching a player play through multiple tackles and multiple, pushed off his line and stay with a play for as long as he did to then make, that fumble that then gave the Cowboys the red zone possession. It's such an interesting thing for a kid to see that because then, when they turn around and they start practicing, they have that, in the back of their mind. And growing up myself, thinking about, watching OBJ play and all these players that are just doing, I mean, unhuman things on the field, and having that as like a positive role model. And I thought this Elijah Clark play was really a great example of that, of playing through the whistle, and no matter how bleak your chances look at making a big play, staying with it, because there's always the chance, and he proved that.
Yeah, and I think it also points to Ian, the idea that you don't necessarily have to be the star of the team to make an impact. And maybe that isn't as huge of a play all the time. You're not the star quarterback. You're not Steph Curry draining, 35 points a game or whatnot, but you can make an impact. But the idea is to stay in present moment, stay with it. How many punts did Philadelphia have that Elijah Clark was on, and not only during the game, but during the season where he gets beat up, thrown down, and all that kind of stuff, but he's stuck with it. This is my role. I'm doing it to the best of my ability. He taps into his why on a regular basis, why I like doing this. And lo and behold, he comes to a point sticking with it, keep doing it, plugging away where he makes a huge play that turns that game around and gives the upset to Dallas. So I think it's another testament to that mental toughness piece and hanging in there and staying in the present moment. And yes, you're not going to have the glory on every play or every other play, but you can still make an impact for you personally and for the team as well too. So interesting kind of piece there that I'm glad you highlighted as we talked about this.
Yeah, and I think there's also a sense that, that's not the first time he's done something like that, right? That's the product of a lot of training, a lot of doing things, all the way through a whistle in practice. And like you said, those special teams guys just get the snot kicked out of them every day. And so, for some of those guys that are kind of proving themselves, he's a walk on to their team, and earning that spot, I think is a tremendous, a motivator to really be, you have to prove your worth through your work, and your ability to stay with the play like that. So, very cool. And that's, whether or not he's done that specific mental skills training that we coach, sometimes that those skills can be developed a little bit incidentally. Like we said, he's a guy that's been trying to earn a spot for a long time and proving that toughness and practicing that toughness in training. We like to address that a little bit earlier and try to teach these skills. And I think, we have an excellent research review to get to here where we talk about the effectiveness of teaching something like mental skills or mental toughness to a group, and then something like what Elijah Clark was able to do maybe is the after effect of the work that we can do in training these skills. So, very briefly here, this study came out of the Journal of Athletic Training, which I love to see sports psychology topics bleeding into other, sports related journals. That gives access to sports psychology for like trainers and physical coaches and things like that. So, again, we're being recognized in more physically aligned journals, which I think is very exciting. But in this particular study by O'Brien and colleagues, they basically ran 54 Division I female athletes from two different teams of the same university through a mental skills training program. So that was a 6-session course where they talked a lot about these mental skills and some techniques to use and some interventions to help develop skills. And after the 6 weeks, it was before and after the 6 weeks, they tested the athletes on their athletic coping skills and their mental toughness using two very well-known scales in the field. And what they found was on mental toughness that the scores on that test improved by an average of about 5 points. And that was statistically significant at the 0.001 level. So for people that are scientifically minded, very, very strong statistical significance there. Then also on the athletic coping skills inventory, scores improved up to 10 points, and that was significant at the zero point zero 0.02 level. So really, the discussion of this article is that we can affect change on these mental skills through more classroom oriented and discussion based interventions. So talking with athletes and listening to their experiences and maybe shaping what their reactions to stressful events may be. And then they can go practice those skills on the field or the court or the pool and what have you. And then, that leads to plays like Elijah Clark's sticking with that play all the way through and forcing that great fumble. So very cool research there, and just shows the effectiveness of the skills training that we do. And I know we know that, but it's always nice to get some validation through the data. So, Mike, did you have any maybe reflections on that research?
Yeah, I think as you pointed out, I think for the both of us, it's kind of like preaching to the choir. But I think it's and we've talked about this informally as well too. I think more and more individuals in and out of sport are realizing the importance of mindset, and how it is not only an integral part of performance, and you could put performance in air quotes if you want. I mean, we're going to talk about performance as it relates to sports, but performance can be a lot of different things as well too. And you could really make an argument that the mindset piece or the mental piece is almost a foundation for that. Yes, for sports, we do a lot on the physical side, strength and conditioning, agility drills, sports specific practices and so forth. But I think it really is sits on top of that whole mindset piece, because if you go into shoot a free throw with zero point 0.2 seconds left to tie the game, you could have spent 8,000 hours in the gym shooting free throws, but it's really where is your mindset at in that moment? Or if you're ready to get off the blocks in a crucial meet in your swim meet, it's you could have been in the pool for hours and hours and hours, and where's your mindset at in that moment? And we could use multiple examples as well too. So it's not nebulous. It's not a life hack. We're not magicians. This isn't a magic trick. These are learned practical strategies, techniques, and skills that you can impart on an athlete that they then learn and practice and get feedback from, just like they do on the physical side with their skill set and what they're practicing, be it free throws or the 100-yard or 100-meter freestyle or whatever the case may be. So it is always nice when you see research like this that kind of validates the work we do as well too. So I don't know if you have the same feelings on that, but I think it's a real integral part of what we do.
Yeah, I think it's also important to address that like nebulous piece, like what you were describing. And I think it maybe speaks more to what sports psychology is, and I think it maybe gets lost, or people think that it's its own field, and to some extent it is, but in another sense it's really not, right? We have this giant body of psychological research, psychological theories, and very, very well understood processes. And what we do, as sports psychology coaches, is take that information from general psychology and say, how can this help an athlete? And then we, package a certain skill in a specific way that then can be taught to an athlete. But really, we're relying on an enormous body of psychological data, just general psychological information, and then applying that to athletes. And so, I think a lot of times we get approached and they say, like, what's your approach? Like, what is your, step one, step two, step three process? And unfortunately, it's more about we have to learn what the athletes need. We're not coming in with, an agenda of I'm going to teach you goal setting, right? Because they might already be really good at that, and then you're just wasting time. So we have to meet the athletes where they are, and then that's where the maybe the art of what we do come in and that's where we evaluate what their experience is and then say from this psychological literature base how can we affect change for this athlete. And so it does come, it can feel very nebulous, but I think maybe a different way to frame that is that it's very flexible. It's very it can be it can meet any athlete where they are. And so sometimes when you go into like a nutrition conversation, they say you should eat X, Y, and Z, and that's not where we come from. We don't have, standard recommendations. It's more of let's try to find, what exactly that specific person in this specific situation might need. So, yeah, I appreciate that idea, and I think I'm just excited with this research that it's showing up in places like the Journal of Athletic Training, because we have the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology and lots of internal, but I think we're preaching to the choir, like you said a little bit. We know, and now it's time to get the information to some other people that work with athletes. So I think that's a
Absolutely.
great point.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, like I mentioned here, we've got Thanksgiving coming up in just a few days. So I did think for our Thanksgiving episode, it was topical to talk about the idea of gratitude. I just to start off, I retweeted or reposted a comedian that was joking about his therapist recommended gratitude, and he was kind of I don't want to say disappointed, but he's like, man, that's crazy that's all it took to pull me out of this negative place was to start recognizing the things that I'm grateful for. So a quote that always sticks with me is that you can't be anxious and grateful at the same time. And I think that's, for athletes, I think that's a great mantra to remember and to keep in your back pocket when you do feel, anxious about the future or outcomes and, self-consciousness, things like that. You can't be anxious and grateful at the same time. So maybe we can start talking a little bit about the mechanisms in which gratitude help and what it exactly is. But just to kind of kick us off, I think it can be a tremendous performance enhancement tool for athletes, and we'll talk about how that pops up in a number of ways. Mike, but what's your experience with coaching gratitude, with athletes that utilize gratitude, or maybe something in your own life?
Sure. One of the things that I learned early on in my mental coaching career is to try and I didn't specifically call it gratitude, but as I got more experienced, I realized that's what it was, is I have had some athletes who have been struggling with the first athlete was more burnout and struggling with more what I generally call the business of sports. You get so
Mhm.
wrapped into practices and games and the athletes, especially maybe some of the younger athletes who are not only playing high school sports, but then they're in travel programs and multiple things. They can get caught up into that quote unquote business of sports and get lost into why they fell in love with the sport to begin with. So one of the things I started doing as an exercise is giving that exercise to my athletes. Take some time, and I've incorporated journaling a lot in my work with athletes. But take some time over a day, 3 days, whatever, and write down all the little things, big things, medium things that you felt why you fell in love with that sport to begin with. And more often than not, they've kind of gotten disconnected from that because they've gotten so wrapped up into the performance piece that they forgot why they like the sport to begin with. And I think over time, I've realized that essentially is gratitude. I'm thankful to be playing football or baseball or hockey or in the pool or whatnot. And these are the reasons why. And then you start getting into tapping into enjoying the experience and staying in the moment and being present moment oriented versus being outcome oriented and so forth as well too. But it kind of stems from just a little exercise on, and you don't have to be Hemingway to do it, but to be able to write down some things on a piece of paper saying, and reminding yourself why you love the game. Because sometimes it is hard to go to practice again or go to that strength training workout again or whatnot as well too, and reminding yourself why it's fun to play. So that's a practical way I've kind of used it with my athletes as well too. I'm not sure if you've done anything similar or how you've connected with some of your athletes with the gratitude side.
Absolutely. Yeah. The journaling, I think, is one of the most effective tools, and we'll talk about that with our challenge for this month. But the process that makes journaling so fantastic is called multimodal processing, and this is for our listeners here. But the idea is that if you have a thought in your head, it can be easy to kind of forget about. And like Mike, what you just said, you kind of grow apart from it. And we all know that we enjoy our sport, or that thought maybe lives in the back of our minds. But when you're able to sit down and use different parts of your brain to address that feeling. So when you're writing it down, right, you're using your motor cortex. When you're reading it, you're using your visual cortex and some different parts of your brain, and so you're engaging more of your psychology in these ideas. And so, step one, I think, is pretty standard. You just think of things that you're gratitude or that you're grateful for. Think of those things, but then you kind of have to do something with it, whether it be write it down or express it. Use your vocal cortex and your language cortex to talk, and to express that gratitude. So the more that you're able to take it just out of your own mind and put it either on the page or out into the world to your coaches, your teammates, I think makes that process of gratitude all the more strong. And really, we can talk about some neuroscience here about what gratitude actually does. And any athletes that you and I work with will know about the sympathetic nervous system and the fight or flight, that startle sensation that all athletes have at some point or another. And what gratitude has been demonstrated to do is actually move you from that fight or flight response into what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of colloquially known as the rest and digest phase. So the idea of intentionally moving from heightened stress, heightened cortisol, heightened norepinephrine, adrenaline, to a place of more relaxation. You get a wave of serotonin and dopamine and some of these like good feeling chemicals. So that can have a whole long lasting tail of effects. Things like your sleep and recovery are going to be better. Your body will physically heal faster because of the lack of cortisol. And to your point there, you can reduce that sensation of burnout because you're not, bathing in all of those negative chemicals all the time. You're allowing yourself to experience more positivity through your sport. So, Mike, I'd love to hear maybe your process for getting an athlete to recognize and maybe work through this gratitude piece. Do you have a process for that?
I usually just try, and it's usually a part of when I teach an athlete to not to get away from the outcome piece and to get into the present moment piece, and to try and really dive into more enjoying the experience of it. So I'll use a hockey play. I'll use hockey as an example because that's the very first time I use that example that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. At a hockey player who was playing on multiple teams, travel programs at the high school level, pretty good, is hoping to get to the next level. And he texted me on a Saturday morning, long texts about how he was done with hockey and that was it. And he had pretty much gotten burned out. And so when we got back together that following week, we started talking about experience and what he was experiencing in the moment and how that differs from what he got into hockey to begin with. What was that experience? What was that reward? You had mentioned all the good hormones that are reward hormones that you feed your brain that helps you keep doing it more and more. And that's where that little exercise comes into play in terms of I had him really take a moment to ask himself why he fell in love with the game of hockey at 4 or 5 years old. And I remember him coming back in one of the sessions saying how he thought that was like the dumbest thing anyone asked him to do. But it became, you could tell as he was explaining it, he got a bigger smile and was very impactful for him. And so we started then to build on that, exactly what you had mentioned, kind of as part of his journaling. I wanted him to at least a couple of times a week sit down and tell himself what he was thankful for that week. Even if it was, I was working on my wrist shot and it got a little better, or I was working on just settling between shifts, and that got a little bit better during the game. It could be a small, medium, or large thing, but we started to get into more of that habit of expressing gratitude so he can keep tapping into that experience of joy and just enjoying each and every time he was out on the ice as much as possible.
Yeah, and what we know from flow state psychology is that when we're intrinsically motivated, being that we're enjoying what we're doing, that's where we perform our best, right? That's where your mind and body kind of come together, merge harmoniously into that flow state where you just lose your sense of self in what you're doing, and that's where we hear it on ESPN all the time. So and so was in the zone, right? They nothing could affect them, and that's when we play our best. So the more that you're able to reinforce that enjoyment and remind yourself. I find the one of the more frustrating things in my line or in our line of work is when athletes just talk about all the things that they have to do, right? I have to go to practice, I have to lift, I have to wake up early. And when you're constantly talking to yourself like that, then your sport becomes a chore, right? You're building it up to be this giant chore. And so I talk to athletes that I work with about changing have to get to. I get to go train. I get to go be with my friends in the weight room. And that is a night and day difference, and you'll see it in their engagement at practice. It's not something that they're dragging their feet through. It's something that they're excited to be at. And there is a social contagion aspect as well. If you show up with that positive and grateful attitude and you're expressing that gratitude to your teammates, they're going to be more willing to help you, and then you're going to be more willing to help them. It's this reflexive cycle, and that's where the best teams are really made. I'm thinking back to the Last Dance with the Michael Jordan documentary, and all the his teammates didn't really like him because they pushed him so hard, but they all were grateful for him doing that to make them all better, right? And forcing them to improve. So you don't have to like everything, but you can still be grateful for it. And I think even for coaches, that's the same. If your coach worked you into the paint today, and then you get out and I'm not happy with you, but you made me better, coach. So thank you for that. So I think there's really a limitless list of benefits that this can have. So team culture benefits, personal, like you said, like hormonal and neurochemical changes, interpersonal things, the lack of burnout or the prevention of burnout. One of the techniques that I really love, so starting with the journaling, once they have that list of 3 or 4 things each day that they're grateful for, I add another piece to it, which is I want you to like put in quotes who contributed to that, who contributed
Mm.
to that success that you're grateful for. And people will often write parents or teammates and coaches or support staff. And that can really, kind of complete that process. So you're grateful for it and you are incorporating that social component as well. So,
Yeah, I love
that's
that
maybe
piece.
my yeah, that's
Yeah.
maybe my process as well.
Yeah, I love that piece a lot. Yeah, and I was going to mention it too, but that all kind of leads into you hear the word culture a lot in sports world and team culture and so forth, and outside of it. And I think that is an integral part of that as well too, being a good teammate and how that is a ripple effect in through the entire team as well too. So absolutely.
Yeah, and I know you've done some coaching as well, and I think there as a coach, there's some very so from a coaching perspective, there's some very practical reasons to express gratitude. And I know I had a number of athletes every time they got out of the water, they said thank you to me, and after a little while, you're like, all right, just yeah, 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 you said this yesterday, right? But the thing that it does, it keeps that person not only top of mind for you, but also in a very positive light, right? So, as a coach, you see your athletes for me, it was about 4 hours a day, but there's a lot of time in between there. And so, if the last kind of touch point with your coach is something positive, like, hey, thanks for practice, like, have a good night, that kind of puts you in a different category than all the people that get out of the water and they're just complaining and they can't wait to get out of there. So I think for kind of coach athlete relationships has a pretty important benefit as well.
No question. No question about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm interested maybe to talk a little bit about the burnout piece with you and why you think that it can prevent that burnout because on the face of it, the athlete still is going to all the workouts. They're still, pushing through all the adversity. But what do you think is the difference between an athlete that gets burnt out versus the athlete that's able to overcome that kind of the kind of monotonous adversity that sports bring sometimes?
Well, I think I love the exercise you just mentioned. Instead of have to, and you reframe that to get to, because that immediately puts you in a different mindset and a different perspective. It's how you're looking at that, how you're looking at practice, or how you're looking at that early morning workout that you're doing three days a week, in addition to maybe an after school or an evening practice or something like that. And I think if you can help change that perspective for yourself going through it as an athlete, that just changes the entire dynamic. Instead of looking at it as something that you're trying to check off and get out of the way, it becomes, how do I use this to get better today? We talk a lot about the three questions that I always have my athletes trying to ask themselves all the time. And one of them is having a mission or a plan going into whatever that might be. Is it a practice? Is it a competition? Or is it a workout? How can I get better today in my 45 minutes or 2 hours in the weight room? Or how can I get better today in my batting practice session, or whatever the case may be? And it just changes that perspective. And it's a more dynamic way of injecting some of that more productive thought processes that make you want to do it versus feeling that you have to do it and something to get out of the way for the day.
Yeah. And I think unfortunately, and this might come across as a retired athlete, maybe yearning for the past, but I think that lesson is often learned too late, right? I mean, I talked to so many people that had, they had a sports career, they had their athletic time, and now, they kind of look back with some regrets, right? Like, man, I wish I hadn't complained quite as much because now, I don't have a team to work out with. Now my training is just fitness, it's not goal oriented for high performance. And you almost it's almost too bad, right? Because it's like you can't go back. You can't recreate this. And so I think a big part of what we do is try to impart that perspective on younger athletes and say, there's going to be a time in your life where you don't have this, and you really want to appreciate it, the moment, the transient moment that this sports life is. And like you said, you can get distracted with the business of sports, and I love that expression. But rooting yourself back in, like, man, I'm having a lot of fun here. Like this really is what I want to be doing. I think what comes to mind here, there was an interview with Jameis Winston when he was back with the Browns, where the reporter asked him, it's really snowy. You're here playing in Cleveland. It's going to be cold. The ball is going to be harder. How is that going to affect your play? And he just didn't even, that question didn't faze him. It was like, I'm just so grateful to be here and play in Cleveland in football weather. I love playing in the snow. And you could just see like that negative valence thought didn't even faze him. Like he's just so rooted in the gratitude for what he gets to do. And I guess maybe closing on the gratitude idea, I heard in a podcast the idea, and I hope I don't butcher it, but it was the idea of like what a privilege it is to be tired from doing something that you always wanted to do.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
as athletes, we grow up and we're like, man, I want to play in college, right? And then when we get to college, all we do is complain about playing, right? Or complain about training. But think about how much of a privilege that is to be doing what it is that you always wanted to be doing. And that can really override some of that anxiety and self-critique and burnout. And it's not just like a fluffy idea. It has some very hard science behind it. There's tremendous research on dopaminergic motivation and how you use dopamine to reward yourself for doing things well. And this is perfectly aligned with that. You have to allow yourself to receive that dopamine rather than living in a negative place about your sport. So, yeah, I appreciate your perspectives there. Was there anything else that you had about, or any other ideas about gratitude?
Just you had mentioned a podcast. I just saw a snippet of a podcast with Jesse Cole. Jesse is the guy who started or is running the Savannah Bananas. If anybody
Mm.
out in our audience has ever seen those guys, being a baseball guy myself, my son turned me on to him a couple of seasons ago. He's got an interesting perspective on the whole game, but he talked, the snippet that I saw was exactly that. And I think the podcaster asked him, how would you change like professional sports, and I think specifically the NFL. And he said one of the things he does with their teams is as the fans come into the stadium to watch the Savannah Bananas play, the players are out there greeting them. So and then they come through the stands before they get to the stadium as well too. So they're interactive a lot. And he said, think of the Dallas Cowboys or the Packers as the fans come in, and he mentioned all the different things. I know there's security issues and all that stuff, but there could be a way where the players are greeting those fans as they come into the stadium saying thank you, because that's who we're playing for. If you guys
Mm.
aren't here, we don't have a sport and we don't get to play other than maybe, in a rec game somewhere or something like that. So it was a real interesting. He's his From a business perspective, he's got his own mindset with all that, but just from a pure enjoyment and enjoying the experience perspective, I thought that was really kind of cool, and a little small window into his idea of gratitude and whatnot as well too.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I think that's really important. There's so much kind of contention between fans and players, especially like the opposing team. But yeah, to recognize that like, yeah, without these guys, we don't have a job. I think
Yeah, right, right.
that's an awesome perspective to take. So, um, well, I think the practical takeaway from the conversation here is that gratitude is something that's incredibly effective, but it's effective if you do something with it. And that brings us to our mental fitness challenge here for the month. And for those of us listening, I recommend, and the challenge this month is to create a gratitude journal. As Mike and I have talked about, it's incredibly helpful to write your ideas down, especially at the end of the day. Just take one kind of final look at your day, and write down three things that you're grateful for. And they can be, as Mike alluded to, very big things that you're grateful for, right? Health and happiness kind of ideas, or someone that held the door from you and made eye contact and smiled, right? That made your day a little bit better. And then, as we also discussed, maybe level two of the fitness challenge would be to think about who is responsible for that thing that you're grateful for. So it might be, a sibling or a teammate or a coach that helped you achieve that goal that you're grateful for. And write them down, right? Give them a little bit of a nod, because we're not all in this alone. It takes a village for everyone to be successful, for anyone to be successful. And so recognize those people that got you there. So, that's our mental fitness challenge, and we'll kind of catch up with you guys next month on it. But Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add to our fitness challenge?
No, I think it's a real powerful, as you alluded to. Again, it's not a life hack. There's a lot of science behind doing that. And I would encourage everyone to get a pen and paper out and do that journal, because it is very, very powerful. And to keep it as an ongoing practice, I think is very impactful for all of us. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, that's a wrap here for episode 17 of the Mental Barbell Podcast. If you found value in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a teammate or coach. For more mental performance training and personalized coaching, visit thementalbarbell.com or follow us on social media at The Mental Barbell. That's all for now, and we'll see you next time.